Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into something really complex but absolutely critical. China's strategy, its positioning within the Middle East, a very volatile region, as we all know.
Indeed. And we've got quite a mix of sources to help us navigate this. Things like immediate news from Fastbull, the Saudi Gazette.
Right, the on-the-ground stuff?
Exactly. But also deeper strategic analysis from the International Institute for Strategic Studies, the ISS.
And even some, more informal chatter from places like Reddit, reflecting public discussion.
Right. So our goal today is really to try and untangle China's approach. Is it calculated neutrality? Is it maybe a pragmatic long game?
Yeah.
Or something else entirely?
Yeah, what's the real story?
We want to explore how their actions, or sometimes their inactions, in the Middle East are shaping things, not just there, but, globally. The economy, geopolitics.
It sounds like a deep dive into power, influence, and maybe this idea of strategic patience.
That's a good way to put it, strategic patience.
Okay, so let's start maybe with the immediate human side of things. That often tells a story. Recent reports from Fastbull and Saudi Gazette, they mention China evacuating citizens. What have we seen there?
We've seen quite a bit of activity, actually. Over 1,600 Chinese citizens evacuated from Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds more from Israel.
Wow, that's significant numbers.
It is, and the logistics are complex. From Iran, for instance, they warned about border congestion, land routes.
Whereabouts?
Into Azerbaijan, at Astara, in Turkmenistan, Bajaran, also options through Turkey, Armenia, Iraq. It wasn't straightforward.
And from Israel?
From Israel, they were bused to the Taba border crossing into Egypt.
So pretty complex operations. It really shows, I guess, their global reach and the need to protect their people.
Definitely. A big priority, no matter how complicated it gets.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how fast these geopolitical tremors turn into, economic waves that affect pretty much everyone. What are the immediate economic impacts our sources are pointing to?
Oh, they're immediate and quite significant. Oil prices, for starters.
Yeah.
They jumped about 10% right after the conflict flared up.
And analysts are worried about more.
Yeah, Wall Street analysts are warning there's more upside risk, especially if Iran, a major oil producer, gets destabilized.
And there's history here, right? JP Morgan has some analysis.
Exactly. JP Morgan looked back, and historically, when regimes change in big oil nations, prices spike. A lot.
How much?
On average, about 30%, peaking sometimes.
Right.
Well, since 1979, the peak average was 76%.
76%? That's huge. That changes everything for energy importing countries, like China.
Absolutely. It forces a whole strategic rethink. And it's not just oil. The IMF managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, she basically said this conflict just adds more uncertainty.
Which is bad for business, globally speaking.
Precisely. Especially when the global outlook was already, a bit strained with trade issues.
And we're seeing concrete costs, too. Shipping?
Yeah, tanker rates in the Middle East surged up to 50% higher since the conflict began.
50%. Wow.
That directly hits global trade, supply chains. It's like a tax on everything moving around the world.
Okay, so we have this immediate crisis, these economic ripples, but let's get into the strategy. China's approach seems, almost contradictory sometimes. Officially, it's all neutrality and non-interference.
Mm-hmm. That's the official line.
But then underneath, there seems to be a very clear strategic agenda. How does that actually play out in the Middle East?
Well, if you connect the dots, looking at the bigger picture, their long game starts to make more sense.
How so?
The IS analysis points out something crucial. They say China is unlikely to really dive deep into a heavy security role in the Middle East.
Until when?
Until its own core security issues are sorted.
Yeah.
Specifically, reunification with Taiwan.
Ah, okay. So it's about priorities. Sequencing.
Exactly. It's strategic sequencing. And there's this view, you hear it in public discussions too, that China's strategy is basically don't get bogged down.
Bogged down where the U.S. has been for decades.
Right. Let the U.S., as some put it, waste its time, money, and effort there. Some even draw parallels, suggesting it could weaken the U.S. over time, maybe like the USSR in Afghanistan.
That's quite a cynical but maybe realistic long-term view. Let your rival exhaust themselves.
It's certainly a patient strategy. Focus inward. Let others deal with the quagmires for now.
Okay, even with that official neutrality, there are these whispers. Our sources hint at them. Reports of more direct support, maybe covert stuff. Does that fit the non-interference narrative?
Well, those whispers, they're more than just whispers in some cases. The ISIS report actually gives some concrete examples that challenge that simple narrative.
Like what?
Well, suspicions and reports of more direct, maybe covert support. Things like rumors of Chinese military aircraft possibly supplying arms, logistics to Iran.
Really?
One specific instance mentioned a Chinese plane allegedly turning off its transponder, landing in Iran, when it was supposedly en route to Luxembourg. If true, that raises questions.
Definitely. What else?
There's also talk, reports at least, of China potentially working with Pakistan, sending weapons, maybe sharing intel for targeting inside Israel.
So it creates this strategic ambiguity. They benefit, maybe, but keep their hands officially clean.
That seems to be the approach. It allows influence without direct entanglement, maintaining that veneer of non-intervention.
And it's not just rumors of planes, is it? The ISAR report mentioned something about dual-use components, Chinese companies being involved.
Yes, and this is quite specific. It's not just speculation.
Oh, what are we talking about?
The ISS details how components from Chinese companies end up in things like Houthi missiles and drones. UAVs.
Specific example.
Yeah, like DLE engines and Kasef and Samad UAVs, or TJ-100 turbojet engines, even Swiss servo actuators found in Kuwait's cruise missiles.
And how do they get there?
Often routed through shell companies. Chinese shell companies based in big trading hubs, like Hong Kong.
Okay, but the really crucial part is...
The crucial part, according to ISIS, is that Chinese authorities have shown little willingness to cooperate with investigations trying to trace these supply chains.
So it's not just happening, it's happening with, perhaps, a lack of official obstruction.
That's the implication.
Yeah.
It allows China to benefit from the destabilizing effects these weapons might have on rivals while maintaining plausible deniability. It shapes the environment without fingerprints.
So if boots on the ground, direct military intervention is basically off the table for China right now, how do they exert influence? How do they build this multipolar world they talk about? Seems like it's mostly economic.
It is largely economic power, yes. And the Middle East is a perfect laboratory for this.
How so?
Well, China's engagement there feeds directly back into its own domestic economic model. Exporting manufactured goods, undertaking huge infrastructure projects.
The Belt and Road Initiative comes to mind.
Exactly. And also exporting advanced digital tech. Think Huawei, Alibaba, involved in 5G networks, smart cities, AI projects.
Which countries are key partners there?
The UAE and Saudi Arabia are particularly big partners in this tech space. It's not just selling them phones, it's embedding Chinese tech standards into the region's future infrastructure.
And it's physical infrastructure too, right? Those port investments. What's the strategy behind those? They seem very strategically placed.
Oh, absolutely strategic. It's a long-term play for global reach. China's invested in over 24 port projects across the Middle East and North Africa.
Owning stakes, long leases.
Both. Sometimes ownership stakes, sometimes these very long, multi-decade concessions. And their locations are key.
Where?
Around all the major choke points. The Gulf, Bab el-Mandeb Strait, Suez Canal, even the Strait of Gibraltar.
And Western analysts see these as potential future naval footholds.
That's certainly the concern flagged by some Western analysts. Potential dual-use, future naval bases, surveillance posts. For China right now, they're vital nodes for Belt and Road trade, projecting influence, and providing logistical options far from home. They are the physical anchors.
Okay, so physical infrastructure, tech infrastructure. What about the financial side? China's promoting its currency, the renminbi, the RMB. How big a deal is this, especially for oil?
It's a very big deal strategically. It's a direct challenge over the long term to the dominance of the U.S. dollar.
How are they doing it?
They're actively pushing the RMB as an alternative, particularly for oil trades. They've set up systems like CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system.
An alternative to SWIFT.
Essentially, yes. And things like the Bridge platform. These offer ways for Middle Eastern countries to trade, potentially bypassing U.S. sanctions.
And has it actually happened? RMB for oil?
Yes. CNPC, the China National Petroleum Corporation, did its first crude oil deal using the digital RMB back in October 2023.
Digital RMB, wow.
Yeah. Now, overall, the RMB's share of global trade is still pretty small, maybe around 4.5%. But the signal is clear. The strategic aim is to build an alternative financial system less dependent on the West.
And this all ties into building their own clubs, their own influence blocks, right? Like expanding BRICS.
Absolutely. It's about creating a parallel structure to the Western-led global order.
Who's joined recently from the region?
Iran joined BRICS in August 2023. The UAE followed in 2024. And Saudi Arabia is reportedly considering it.
And other groups, like the SQO.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, yes. Iran became a full member. Several Gulf states are now dialogue partners. These groups focus on trade, but also security cooperation.
Any examples of that security side?
Sure, Iran attended the SKO's Interaction 2024 counterterrorism exercise, held in Xinjiang, actually.
Interesting. So it's not just talk, it's actual security engagement within these non-Western blocs.
Precisely. And it positions China as a key convener, an orchestrator of this alternative framework.
Now, China isn't trying to be the main security cop in the region, not replacing the U.S. role directly, but arms sales are up and more military exercises. What's the point of that?
It's what you might call controlled military cooperation. It serves multiple purposes.
Okay.
Arms exports to the Middle East are up significantly, about 80% higher under Xi Jinping between 2013 and 2023.
What kind of arms?
Things like helping Saudi Arabia manufacture its own ballistic missiles, helping Iraq produce armored vehicles. It builds influence, creates dependencies.
And the exercises?
Military exercises with countries like Saudi Arabia. They had the Blue Sword naval exercises, or the UAE Air Force training in Xinjiang with the PLA Air Force. These are strategic opportunities.
How so? Especially the Air Force one.
Well, the UAE flies aircraft similar in some ways to Taiwan's. So for the PLA, exercising with them offers a chance to get familiar with the capabilities of potential adversaries.
Ah, okay. So it feeds back into their primary strategic concerns, like Taiwan.
Exactly. It's pragmatic, calculated military engagement, gathering intel, building relationships, shaping capabilities, all without putting large numbers of boots on the ground. So, it's a very delicate dance for China, trying to balance this image of neutrality with its growing interests and ambitions.
And it creates diplomatic challenges, right, like with Israel.
Definitely. China's strong rhetoric supporting the Palestinians, talking about historical ties, criticizing the West, but noticeably avoiding the word hostages for those held by Hamas.
That must have strained things with Israel.
It absolutely strained the relationship. Deeply. But then, interestingly, after the ceasefire efforts began, China did try to re-engage with Israel. It shows that pragmatic flexibility again. Interests often outweigh strict ideology.
But this strategy, this sort of self-serving neutrality, it isn't foolproof, is it? You mentioned the Houthis and shipping.
Right. A perfect example of how even a calculated strategy can backfire or have unintended consequences.
What happened there?
China decided not to join the U.S.-led patrols in the Red Sea against Houthi attacks. The Houthis even said they wouldn't attack Chinese ships. But a Chinese-owned ship still got damaged. It just highlights that in such a volatile region, relying on others' promises or perceived neutrality doesn't guarantee your interests are safe. It can still disrupt trade.
And internally within China, is everyone on board with this cautious approach?
No, there's apparently quite a debate. You have the cautious theory, people arguing for prudence, minimal entanglement, focusing on Taiwan.
And the other side?
An optimistic theory, pushing for China to be more active, to use its growing power more directly in regional issues. This internal tension probably explains some of the pragmatic shifts we see.
So looking ahead, what does this mean for you listening to this? How might global power dynamics shift? What's the likely path for China in the Middle East?
Well, the IS analysis suggests the most likely scenario, looking out towards 2040, is what they call high economic engagement, low defense engagement. Meaning China will likely continue to prioritize its economic influence, building those ties, while generally avoiding deep military commitments, relying maybe implicitly on others, even rivals like the U.S., to provide a baseline level of security.
So China can free up its own resources for its main goals, like Taiwan.
That seems to be the core calculation. Focus resources where they matter most to Beijing.
And there's that sentiment we found, sort of echoing through some discussions. America's own mismanagement creates opportunities for China.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme.
It benefits from restraint and cautious action. When your opponent is making mistakes, there is no reason to get in their way. It really does sound like a very patient, long game.
It does. Leveraging perceived stability, even if provided by others, to advance its own long-term economic and strategic goals.
So what we've really sketched out today is this picture of China's engagement in the Middle East as deeply pragmatic, multi-layered, very focused on economic strength, strategic patience, trying to reshape things without getting drawn into direct conflict.
Which leads us, and you, with a pretty big question to think about. As these global power balances keep shifting, is this calculated long game, this focus on economic clout and patience, going to be the winning strategy in our increasingly volatile world?
Or will the pressures keep mounting? Will demands for China to play a bigger security role eventually force its hand, making it change that core foreign policy approach?
That's the key question going forward. Will the long game hold, Or will circumstances force a change? Something to keep watching.